there's two main ideas people have in mind when it comes to future revival. One is mind uploading, the idea of taking someone's brain and somehow giving them a new artificial digital format based on the original biological brain. And the other version is just fixing the brain and body that the individual had directly through maybe some kind of nanomedicine or just much more advanced medicine than we have today.
Sorry, if I can interrupt just for a second. In the first option, do we mean like they just upload you into some sort of a very detailed and advanced version of Minecraft or something?
So yeah, let's get into the details. So there's all sorts of different ways you can imagine something like mind uploading, giving someone a new digital electronic brain could work. So I was talking before about the brain implants and prostheses that people have been given, where, for example, they have loss of a limb and they get an implant which can help them control a limb. Or when they have a bit of their brain is damaged, but they get given some implant that can replace what its functions were. You can imagine taking this to its logical extreme, where you have a digital or electronic version of a brain that perfectly recreates the previous functions of the biological brain on which it was based. So that would be called a whole brain emulation, where what you've done is you've looked at all 86 billion neurons that make up some human's brain, and you've looked at all of the roughly quadrillion connections that exist between those neurons, those synapses, and then you've recreated them in some format. Now that might be just digitally or virtually inside standard computing hardware that we think about in the memory of a hard drive. Or it could also alternatively possibly be in what's called a neuromorphic format. So that's a kind of still digital electronic format, but where the hardware is much more similar to what we normally think about with biological brains. But either way, you've taken the biology, you've scanned someone's brain at very high resolution, you've used that information to recreate their brain, and then you have to connect it up to some sort of sensory inputs and outputs, whether that's a robotic body, whether that's a virtual body, something that can give them back their vision and their taste and their feeling of having a body. That's the coarse-grained idea of what people have in mind when they're thinking about uploading.
If I forced you to risk a prediction on when we would be able to achieve all of this preservation, scanning, reviving, etc., what would you say?
So there's a difference between my view and what I think the community of neuroscientists would say. So I'm slightly more optimistic. I look at extrapolating the history of computing performance, and I think about, so a brain maybe has something like, we know it has about 86 billion neurons. We know it's got about a quadrillion connections. We have an idea that we could model those things with maybe each neuron could be modeled as 10,000 different compartments interacting with each other. And you could put these sort of numbers together and get a guess at what amount of computing power would be required to create a digital version of a brain. And then you can look at how computing performance has been improving over the years. And you see things I think we've had 100 million increase in computing speed since the 1990s to today. And if you think there's a chance that will continue to hold, that Moore's law will continue to hold, that would give you an estimate of maybe we could produce an equivalent digital version of a human brain sometime in the late 2040s or early 2050s. But that's assuming everything went right, and it never does in science. So probably at some later time point than that, maybe towards the end of the century.
Gosh,
but actually,
miss it. Yeah.
I did a survey of neuroscientists recently, of randomly selected neuroscientists, asking them these sorts of questions, being when do you think the first whole brain emulation of a human would possibly be created? And the average response I got from people was about 21, 25, I think. So sometime early in the 22nd century. Now, these are all sort of ballpark numbers. I wouldn't put too much stock in them. I wouldn't be putting big bets down on this is the precise year. But that's sort of the vague numbers people have in mind for when these things might become possible.
I just got a terrible idea. What if this actually happens, but then people in the future decide, for example, that I was a total piece of shit or something, and then they just upload me in some nightmarish scenario, like the final level of the video game Doom, which is basically in hell or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's plenty of sci-fi stories that sort of explore these hellish possibilities. And like, they're obviously impossible to completely dismiss the idea that that might be something that happens. Because if you're saying this technology is possible, then it enables all sorts of scenarios. But my response would be it's very strange to imagine a world in which someone would go to the bother of preserving you, of maintaining your preserved body for all this time, of working out how to revive and upload you, of restoring you to consciousness with all the expense that it would take to do that, to then just decide to like torture you. I think in almost all circumstances, if people like don't care about you, they're just going to let your body rot or like not do anything. And the default state would be, just to leave people in preservation or let them decay. I think what's actually much more likely is the only circumstance under which anyone is getting revived is if our descendants look at the world in which they live in and they see that that world is a better world than the world that we live in today, that we've solved climate change, we haven't destroyed ourselves with nuclear war, we've solved poverty issues, we've provided wealth and prosperity to everyone, and they think, you know what, this is actually a pretty good world to live in, and like maybe it would be a fun challenge to try and revive our ancestors and let them share this world with us. I mean, that's why I called the book The Future Loves You, because this is the sort of thing I think we should be working towards. And I think it's the positive vision of like the kind of future we would like to live in, is one that would be good for our descendants and then hopefully also good for us. Because in the same way, like there's plenty of terrible things that exist at the moment, whether that's climate change, conflicts, inequality. But if you take a bit of a historical perspective and you look back at the fact that like 200 years ago, 1 in 2 children died before they were 15. Most people lived in extreme poverty. There was considerably more violence than there is today. Women were oppressed. We still had slavery. Like, it's not that the world doesn't have problems, but it's getting better. And I hope that it will continue to get better in that way.
Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I've been told I have to say that, otherwise nothing happens. Weird. Also, if you feel like it, support me on Patreon. This is a one-person pod. I do everything myself. There's no team behind me, so please feel free to hop on Patreon and find smart cookies on there. And then last but certainly not least, I have to thank my existing patrons. Tovarishi and Tovarishice, you legends, you. Without you, there would be no pod, which makes you actual producers of this show. So eternal thanks to Jush Premro, Nate Sirk, Goran Ivasic, Anje Sever, Ole, Marin Ferrara, Aljaž Maher, Strole, Aida, Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Goran, Gordan, Lorenzo, Jurečuk, Mila, Carmen, Veronica, and Taichi. Seriously, I'm touched. Thank you so much.